days, many established newspapers and magazines are struggling to survive, while at the same time, internet links, web blogs, social media, the many talk shows in the 500-channel television universe are main source of news and information for many people, especially young people. But because of the uneven quality and reliability of these sources, it means that many people have a difficult time separating fact from fiction, distinguishing truth from propaganda. When we talk about propaganda today, propagandists, of course, try to get their ideas into our heads, and they try to get us to believe them. Now, of course, they're not the only ones. Lots of people do that. Teachers, advertisers, social reformers, politicians, usually with higher motives than those of the propagandists. But, parapsychologists claim that they can put ideas into our heads across vast distances in defiance of the laws of physics. Now, probably no one here believes that, but I actually want to begin with a demonstration. What I'm going to do is to put a word into your heads simultaneously. It's going to appear, and you can't stop it. And so, as part of this demonstration, so just bear with me. Pizza. Now, I have a lot of confidence that just about everybody here received this message. It lit up some neurons in your brain, spontaneously disappeared in your consciousness, just as I said it would do. Not impressed? Okay, so maybe it's not up to the standard of Randy or Banachek, but there is something important going on here that I want to talk a bit about. I'm going to tell you how it was done, or you think you know already. Okay, so let me remind you how it's done. Let's go back to about grade 5 or so. And remember, we were told that we live in a swirling molecular sea made up mostly of nitrogen. We're surrounded by nitrogen. Fortunately, there's some oxygen as well, or we'd be in trouble. And these molecules pound against us with considerable force, strong enough to keep airplanes in the air if they're moving. About 14.7 pounds per square inch, which means that on the surface of my forearm, the upper surface, there's a pressure of over 500 pounds. Now, of course, I don't sense it because there's an equal pressure below and at the sides. But it's because of this molecular sea that I was able to do that astounding demonstration a moment ago. I was able to make some ripples in that atmosphere and send those ripples to your eardrums, and your brain then converted them into sound. So we all know about this. Over millions and millions of years of evolution, we developed this incredible capacity, unique amongst species, to be able to manipulate our larynx, our tongue, our lips, and so forth, to make very precise undulations in this sea of molecules. And those spread around us just as ripples spread around a rock dropped into a pond. Just as amazing is what happens at the other end, the eardrum, the ear. All sorts of things are causing perturbations in the atmosphere. And so the ear has to sort out what comes from us and what comes from other disturbances. And to do that, it carries out essentially what mathematicians call a Fourier analysis, a Fourier transform, breaking this large wave into fundamental frequencies so that we can sort out the message from the noise. And once we've done that, then our brains manufacture sound. They manufacture sound because sound does not exist outside our heads. In the same way that there's no color in the world around us. Color is purely a subjective phenomenon that our brains invent. So our brains invent sound. It takes a great deal of neural processing, both on the part of the sender and the receiver, to do this. But as a result, we can transmit almost limitless amounts of information, one to the other, without any effort, without realizing even how we're doing it. And, if someone were to come here from another planet where there was no atmosphere, so we can send all kinds of messages, I mentioned, but if someone were to come here from another planet without an atmosphere, he or she or it would wonder, how do these humans do it? How do they communicate? Probably the first guess would be, well, it's visual, looking at the movements of the lips or so forth. But once you realize that this happens, even if you're not in visual contact, this creature from the other planet would be puzzled again. Well, okay, so humans have learned over the years to transduce these vibrations into various forms, electrical signals for telephone, radio waves, bumps on CDs, magnetic changes on tape, grooves and records and so forth. But for us to get these messages, we once again have to turn them back into ripples in the air for us to hear them. We've also learned across the millennia to transcribe these things in written form in various scripts. But again, when you read these, in a sense, you can hear yourself saying the words inside your head. So this capacity to send messages is very useful to us. It's also very useful, of course, to propagandists. But there's more. And one of the things that we often fail to recognize is that these ripples carry not just the words themselves, but a lot of other information. So, for example, we're consciously aware of the words, but we're not conscious, for the most part, of what is called the prosody. Now, speech linguists say that speech is double-coded. That is, the message is carried both by what is said and how it is said. And prosody refers to such things as loudness, inflection, pitch, and these can change the meaning. So if I were to respond to something you said with, "Isn't that lovely?" that means something quite different from if I say, "Isn't that lovely?" So I've changed the meaning completely. The words remain the same. And so this gives speech, compared to printed word, much more flexibility. We can communicate all sorts of things by prosody. We can communicate dominance. Because of our social history, where men have generally ruled the world, the lower male voice is typically associated with power. And so when people want to sound powerful, they lower their voice. This kind of voice doesn't just command as much respect, right? So dominance, confidence, the credibility of the speaker is measured often by the prosody. And prosody also communicates emotion. We can choose our words carefully. We can hide our emotions in terms of what we say. It's harder to hide them in terms of how we say things. And so we often get impressions of people's emotions, impressions that are leaked out through prosody that they did not necessarily want us to have. And of course, speech through both prosody and words can also arouse emotion. And this is obviously what propagandists love to do. But there's even more. These ripples, these little undulations that we produce without thought, give information about the speaker's gender, age group, education, social class, sometimes geographical origin, ethnic group, and more. And these too influence the seriousness with which we view the words. We listen differently to different people depending on what we think their social class or educational level to be. And again, a skilled propagandist can exploit this, use it to create us versus them scenarios. And there's even more. Every individual, I find this amazing, these small ripples in the air, every one of us produces ripples that are slightly different. So once we're familiar with someone, we can pick their voice out of a crowd. And that too is important for the propagandist, because certain speakers saying certain words will have much more of an effect on a crowd than certain other speakers, because of the respect, the adulation that the crowd has for the individual. The words affect us differently depending on who is saying them. And one last thing. So I've mentioned what is said is important, how it is said is important, who says it is important, but also to whom it is said is important. And as the late social philosopher Eric Hoffer wrote, "The gifted propagandist brings to a boil ideas and passions already simmering in the minds of his hearers." And keep some of these in mind when you think about modern-day politics, because some of the things I've talked about and will talk about are very evident in some modern-day politicking. So in summary, then, I'll just read this out. The ripples of the skilled and charismatic propagandist influence people by stimulating existing prejudices, promoting us versus them identification, generating emotion, offering leadership, solutions, inspiring confidence, and even more. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice from the air conditioning. I may have to communicate telepathically after this. Okay, now let me turn directly to propaganda. Excuse me. Many definitions, but this one is as good as any. Propaganda is a deliberate, systematic attempt to shape perceptions, manipulate cognitions, direct behavior to achieve a response that furthers the desired intent of the propagandist. In other words, manipulation. Manipulation. Propaganda has been used in one form or another throughout history, but the term that we use, the word propaganda, dates back only to 1622 when Pope Gregory XV set up the Congregatio de Propaganda Fidei in order to propagate the Christian truth. The idea was that true beliefs were being taught to people around the known world. There was no concept of distorting or manipulating the truth. It was just getting the truth to people. The negative connotation that normally is associated with that word today comes from the Nazis' use of propaganda to turn citizenry against particular target groups of individuals. And although the orator is still the best vehicle for propaganda because of all the nuances I've mentioned, propaganda also occurs, of course, in printed form and in colorful posters such as these, pushing particular political points of view. In wartime, propaganda posters are used to motivate citizenry to fight the enemy. In wartime, propaganda leaflets are dropped on soldiers, enemy soldiers, to try to convince them that they're being taken advantage of by people back home and they should surrender and they'll be treated well. And of course, propaganda posters have always been employed by dictators in gaining and maintaining power. The picture on the right is actually the 2019 Putin calendar, obviously demonstrating considerable strength, and available, by the way, if you're interested, on Amazon. I do apologize for my voice. So, what does psychology have to tell us about attempts to influence us, propaganda-wise or otherwise? There are a number of things we can learn. First of all, we have a built-in default bias. That is, we automatically accept new information as true, and then as a second stage, examine its credibility. And if the propagandists could keep us from getting to that second stage, we're much more likely to accept nonsense as truth. Now, this makes sense in terms of adaptivity. You can imagine running through the jungle and someone yells, "Lion coming!" The skeptic says, where? The default bias pushes the person to run away and evaluate later. And the costs of running away and being wrong, wasting your time, are much less than the costs of being too skeptical and being perhaps eaten up. So, propagandists try to keep us from doing that credibility check. When we want to look at credibility, often the only information we have is from the source. Who's saying this? Do we trust this person? Do we believe this person? And so in this modern day, if you have a friend whose only source of political news is, say, Fox News, then that person is likely to have a different understanding of the political universe than someone who relies on CNN or NPR or BBC or whatever. Propagandists know this, and they sometimes make efforts to disguise the source. And in a process known as astroturfing, what they try to do is to make it look as though the message is coming from a grassroots movement of people who have risen up to express their opinions either in support of a product or a policy or cause. And it's called astroturfing because it looks like grassroots support, but it's artificial. Now, a good example of that is this poster from an anti-Obamacare rally, "Hands off my health care," apparently sponsored by Americans for Prosperity, apparently a grassroots organization of concerned citizens. In reality, a group set up by the Koch brothers, the billionaire Koch brothers, to further their political aims. This has been identified by the Center for Media and Democracy as classic astroturf. Now, it's clear why they do this. You can imagine this poster would not have nearly the effect on spectators if it carried this message at the bottom. Well, the illusion of truth effect refers to the fact that the more a message is repeated, even if it's false, the more likely it is we're going to consider it as being true. And of course, advertisers know this. That's why we get all these banal ads repeated over and over and over, because the advertisers know that the irritation produced by the repetition is more than offset by the increased credibility of the message due to the repetition. And the continued influence effect. This refers to the finding that when false information is later retracted, sorry, we published that yesterday, but it was there. We're withdrawing it. It doesn't undo the original effect. And of course, you can think of this in your everyday lives. If someone down your street is accused of child sexual abuse, and then the next day the police say, "Sorry, we made a mistake, wrong person," Are you as likely as you were a couple of days earlier to hire that person as your babysitter? Maybe not. The taint lingers. You're not quite sure. That's the continued influence effect. Motivated cognition refers to the fact that ambiguous evidence is interpreted typically in a way that we wish it were true. So you hear about a rally where some protesters ended up in hospital with broken bones after a confrontation with the police. Those people who are very supportive of the police will probably interpret this ambiguous message as the protesters got really stroppy, they got out of hand, they had to be restrained. Those who are critical of the police are probably going to interpret this message as police brutality once again. They used unnecessary force on these poor protesters. And so different listeners get a different message from the same ambiguous report. It's interesting, Adolf Hitler anticipated these and other psychological findings. And as I go through some of the cardinal points that he made others as well, but I don't have time for them all, pay attention to how some of these are reflected in modern day political discourse. So Hitler wrote in Mein Kampf, and by the way, I should point out, Joseph Goebbels, his minister of propaganda, often gets credit for these, but they originated in Mein Kampf long before. So the idea, the illusory truth effect, he said, propaganda fails unless one fundamental principle is kept in mind, confine it to a few points, repeat them over and over. Avoid abstract ideas, use stereotype phrases, avoid objectivity. Find the psychologically correct way to arouse the emotions of the masses. So keep people from evaluating. Focus on the emotion. Use prosody. And we see some of that with some of the phrases of modern day as well. So try to get people not to evaluate. Constantly criticize enemies of the state. Focus on a particular enemy for special vilification. Never allow the public to cool off. And never admit a fault or wrong. Hitler also spoke about the big lie. He said, this is a lie. It's a whopper, so incredible that no one will think it's a lie because they can't imagine anyone telling a lie. Like, no one can get away with that, so it must be true. The notion of the big lie. And Hitler also wrote in Mein Kampf, the grossly impotent lie always leaves traces behind it, even after it's been nailed down, a fact which is known to all expert liars in this world and to all who conspire together in the art of lying. And this, of course, is what I referred to earlier as the continued influence effect. And again, we see these things being used over and over. Lenin had his own set of rules for propaganda. He said, first of all, you must demonize your opponents. Call them saboteurs, hoarders, kulaks. Those were references to rich peasants. And if there's something going wrong, blame it on your predecessor. Where have we seen that before? He blamed Tsar Nicholas II, of course. He said, never waste a crisis. Exploit it, make use of it. Turn it to your advantage. And if someone uses a term that against you, co-opt it, make it your own. If someone says you're anti-democratic, he said, no, democracy is indispensable to our movement. It's part of us. So he had these ploys, and he followed them. Others have had their own ploys. So in modern times, a form of propaganda we hear a lot about is fake news. And we can consider this in two different aspects. First of all, fake news, in which false news is made to seem genuine. That's pretty straightforward. Now, that's often done for propaganda purposes, sometimes just to sell tabloids. You've seen those at the checkout counter, I'm sure, at the grocery store. But it's much more serious when, in fact, people use it for political purposes. Here's a report of an Iranian propaganda program. They set up a fake BBC page. So borrowing on all the prestige and reliability of the BBC, they could publish whatever they wanted, and the hope that people, in evaluating it, wouldn't go too far and simply say, well, if it's on the BBC, it must be true. And here's a fake ABC page. When President Obama was in office, Obama signs executive order banning the Pledge of Allegiance. Looks all the world like the real BBC page. So this is real fake news. Even Benjamin Franklin, the revered Benjamin Franklin, wasn't beyond fake news. He published a counterfeit edition of the Boston Independent Chronicle in which it was reported that George III of England, the King of England, was inciting natives to scalp the colonists. This was a lie, but Franklin published it in the hope it would be reprinted in other publications. His goal was to foment anger and rebellion against the British Crown. And to some extent it worked. Didn't do much for relationships with indigenous people either, I can tell you. This modern day, of course, we've got all kinds of other techniques available. We have photographs, videos, and so forth. And this makes it possible to engineer large-scale propaganda campaigns leading to belief change. But of course, we are starting to realize that pictures and videos no longer necessarily carry as much truth as we once thought.
Being All-American.
Very good, sir.
Congratulations. How does it feel to be an All-American?
Very good, sir.
Congratulations. How do you feel?
I gotta pay.
I believe he said he had to go pee.
So Forrest Gump taught us that we shouldn't trust necessarily what we see on the screen or in the photograph. But that's, in a sense, child's play compared to what's coming down the pipe. People are getting very worried about new technology in which artificial intelligence, deep learning, is used to scan as many photographs and videos of a public figure as you can get in order to construct a computer algorithm where you can generate the facial features of that person and have him or her say whatever you want, and generate the voice in the same way so that it goes along with it. Deep fakes, some refer to deep video portraits. Not quite perfect yet, but they're getting pretty good.
It may be the center of the shitstorm that permanently ushers in the post-truth era.
Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet. Stay woke, bitches.
Now, you can imagine, as this process is refined, how difficult it will be to trust with your own eyes interviews with people. And it's kind of scary. It's kind of scary because already you can download some apps that will help people to do this. The apps that are publicly available for download are still a little bit primitive, but here's one called Fake App. Adobe announced a program where, as I'll read here, the software makes it possible to take an audio recording and rapidly alter it to include words and phrases the original speaker never uttered, what sounds like their voice. So this makes propaganda swoon. Now, another aspect of fake news is making genuine news seem fake. And Hitler was no stranger to this. He talked about those elements of the press that opposed him in the early days. He referred to them as the Lügenpresse, the lying press. Don't believe them, they're lies. And he said, propaganda works best when people don't trust the press. And again, we see that reflected.
No, I'm not going to give you a question. I'm not going to give you a question. Can you stay categorically? You are fake news. Sir, go ahead.
And because of this change, where a number of people are starting to believe that you can't trust traditional press, magazines like this that say global warming is a hoax, or that this poster, the greatest lie ever told, is that vaccines actually save people. Instead, they cause disease. Those reach a larger and larger sympathetic audience because people have become conditioned to think, well, critics are just spreading fake news. So the point is, propaganda works. It doesn't work all the time, but it works well with some people in particular. And it works in part because we're all poor at detecting lies. Even trained customs inspectors and judges and psychologists who think they're good at detecting lies, when you put them to the test, they rarely do any better than chance. If we can't detect lies, then how do we know we're being propagandized? Some people say, younger people, you don't have to worry, they're more sophisticated. They're used to social media. They're not going to be as taken in as we adults are. But that doesn't seem to be true either, because one large study, for example, of middle school, high school, and college students found that most of the students mistook fake news for genuine news. And even if you gave them a hint and labeled it sponsored news content, which generally means advertising, they took this for journalism as well. And even Twitter carried out a study of what so-called rumor cascades. Over a period of 10 years, who or what is retweeted most. And it turns out that false news is 70% more likely to be retweeted than the truth. And why is that? Because it's more exciting, it's more stimulating. It's more exciting to say a man has bitten a dog, the old thing, than a dog has bitten a man. So lies are scattered more rapidly and widely. So the question is, what can we do about it? It's not an easy question to answer. First thing we have to realize is there is no easy fix. It's going to be a struggle. But there are some ideas that we can consider. One is forewarning people. If we could decide what is propaganda, perhaps then we could help people by warning them that, look, you can read this if you want, but you should be very careful. Check the source yourself. You know, if you send people out into the forest to collect mushrooms, you would never do that without, first of all, helping them understand, don't just eat anything. But if we could do that with propaganda, it would be great. In earlier days, it was easier. Second World War, there were posters like this in Allied countries, don't fall for enemy propaganda. But there were fewer sources of propaganda. They were cruder. They were easier to detect. And now, with sophisticated techniques, propagandists make it very difficult. And its timeliness is important as well, because things are happening so much more quickly in the media than they were a couple of decades ago. And there are so many more forms of media. Very difficult to monitor them all and say, oh, by the way, just today there was something you should watch for. Some people think artificial intelligence, scanning media feeds, will be the answer. Others are very doubtful, but it might help. Another thing we can do is consider counter-propaganda. That is, the propaganda comes out, we counter it. We say, no, that's not true. Here's what the truth is. Now, that has its own risks, because you may end up simply perpetuating the rumors and the falsehoods. And there's also the risk always of what's called the backfire effect. This is the finding that sometimes when you deny things, your audience actually thinks, well, there must be something true there. You wouldn't be denying it. Here's an example.
Well, I'm not a crook.
Nixon's statement probably didn't need someone saying, oh, I guess he's not a crook. I'm reassured to hear that. More likely, some people said, why is he saying that if he doesn't have something to hide? And that's the backfire effect. So we have to be very careful about that. Another approach, well, the evidence in general shows the best approach is to focus on truth, get the truth out there. And if we can get the truth out as early as possible, even before the propaganda hits, that's the best thing, because we've given an alternative interpretation to people to consider. Now, during the Second World War, although German propaganda was very effective on the home front, initially at least, the propaganda broadcast towards England, towards the Allies in English, was laughable. An Irish American by the name of William Joyce became a Nazi. He broadcast from Berlin in English, and the English laughed at him. Lord Haw-Haw is what they called him. And so that propaganda failed. On the other hand, the BBC made the deliberate decision to broadcast only truth, even if it meant reporting Allied losses as well as victories. And so these were broadcast in German towards the German people, and over time they came to realize that they could trust more what they heard on the BBC than they could on German radio. And so, in subtle ways, then, the BBC was able to propagandize without really diverting from the truth, simply being selective about it. Some psychologists are working on what they refer to as a psychological vaccine. There are various ways of doing this, but a modern approach is to develop a computer game where people play the role of a propagandist. You teach them the skills that propagandists use, in the hope that over time, they'll spot these themselves when someone is trying to use propaganda against them. When you play the role of propagandist, there's the University of Cambridge page. I'll just read you the headline. Fake news vaccine online game may inoculate by stimulating propaganda tactics. No cure-all, but it's another thing that we can consider. And finally, although it's a terrible cliche, we've got to teach and encourage critical thinking. And I say it's a cliche because everybody here goes, oh yeah, I've got to think critically, teach critically, the world will be a better place. But it's not easy to do, and it's not even easy for us to be critical in our thinking all the time. We may not believe in the paranormal, but I think anybody in this room, including myself, we made some real boo-boos when it came to the application of critical thought at some points in our lives. So it's frustrating to try to teach it, to try to disseminate, yet we don't have any choice, in my opinion. Reminded that in its early days, IBM had it as motto in many languages, the word think. Apple riffed on that with think different. Grammar's a little off, but... And I think the unofficial motto of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry should be think critically. And we've got to keep getting that message out, as I said. It's sometimes frustrating to do it in this era of the war on science and reason. But we mustn't stop. We should take our cue, I think, from the British Second World War. Keep calm, carry on, and keep making waves. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring that bell to be notified about new videos. You can follow us on social media, and if you really love what we do, consider supporting us with a donation. Links to all that good stuff is in the description below.